Okay, so in this video, I actually want to build in some protected routes and talk about JSON Web Tokens. So we're actually going to get this set up and we're going to use a JSON Web Token to authorize and authenticate a user. So the first thing I want to do is pull up a website called jwt.io, and I want to talk about JSON Web Tokens. So I also want to pull up our website here too, and I want to do a quick recap of how authentication works in Django by default. So we're going to be using JSON Web Tokens for our API, but Django by default uses session-based authentication. So if we open up our browser here and we go into the console, we'll go into application here, we're going to see a cookie here. So if we go into storage and cookies, you're going to see the session ID. So to recap that video where we handled authentication, what happens is on login, Django creates a session ID in the database. We have an entire database table for session IDs. It adds that to the browser and it gives us this encrypted piece of data. So it's information about our user. Now, on every single request, this session ID is retrieved by the backend. And if we're ever hitting an endpoint that's supposed to be restricted only to logged in users, Django will check this ID and make sure that the user is allowed to be there. So that's how it currently works. Now for our API, these are completely different here. In theory, we could use session-based authentication too, but I like to use JSON Web Tokens, and I'll talk about why. So the first reason to why we even have to set this up differently from what's currently going on in our application is that depending on how you set up your API, there's going to be cases where your API and your backend or your server and your front end are going to be completely separate applications. So you may have one hosted on one server, one on another server, and because these are completely separate, you need a token to pass along between two applications. So anytime somebody from the front end, let's say we build out some kind of front end and a user tries to log in, they need to have some kind of token on their browser to send to the backend. Now in theory, sessions could work for this, but in this case, we're going to use JSON Web Tokens. So if that doesn't make sense, we're going to see this in action soon. So a JSON Web Token is simply an encrypted piece of information. This is an encoded token right here. It's an encrypted piece of information about our user. So when I add in this token here, we can see the token decoded. So we can see the header, we can see information. So the payload here tells us the user's ID, the name of the user, and so on. So I'm going to show you how to generate these tokens for users currently in our database. So I also want to recap authentication and authorization. So authentication is where we find out who a user is, and authorization is when we find out what a user could do. So once we generate this token is going to be stored somewhere, whether that's in our cookies or local storage, and we're going to send it on each request to any route that is protected and that needs some kind of token to authorize a user to visit that endpoint. So in this case, the endpoints are going to be our API endpoints. So let's go ahead and pull up the Django REST framework. So there's different ways of actually handling authentication. So I want to go ahead and look at a few options and then show you how we're going to do it. So there's actually a third-party package built on top of this even that allows us to do this. So we're going to go into tutorial. Let's go into API guide. Actually, I think it's somewhere here, and we can go into authentication. So by default, there is session-based authentication. There are different third-party libraries, and it shows us exactly how to configure it here. If I go on the left side, though, I like to use a package called simplejwt.io. So let's take a look at this. We can go into JSON Web Token authentication. So there's different options. Some of these tokens are actually stored in the database. I personally don't like that. I like to just encrypt user information in the actual token. So we're going to use this option here. So on the left side, go to, if you actually want to see the documentation, go to JWT or JSON Web Token, and this is the one you're going to see. So I'm going to click on this link right here, and this is the package that we're going to use here. So instead of actually looking up at the GitHub repo, let's just do a search for simple JWT. I thought it would pull me up directly to the documentation, but I guess it didn't. So this is the package that we're going to use to create our JSON Web Token. So let's follow the installation process and let's just get things set up here. So we'll go through here, we'll go into installation, and let's start here. So the first thing I want to do is run a pip install. So we're going to do pip install Django REST framework dash simple JWT. So we're going to copy that, and let's go ahead and open up our terminal. So remember, my VS Code is being weird here, so I have to type in python-m first. So python-m, and I'm just going to paste in what I copied. So pip install Django REST framework simple JWT. So we're going to get that installed, and we need to do a few more things here. So the next thing is we need to tell Django how we're going to handle authentication for our API. So in this case, I'm just going to copy this dictionary right here. I'll zoom in a little bit. So we're going to copy this, and we're going to paste this into settings.py. So that's where the documentation tells us to go. So we'll go into settings.py. So in dev search, settings.py, and I'm just going to add this just above our middleware here. So I'm going to paste this in, and I just want to clear this up here because that's going to give us some errors. I just want to make sure we have no indentation errors. We'll take out all of these. So just let the formatting work here. Take out all of that, and that should be good. So if I save that, it should auto format it, and there we go. So make sure the indentation's all correct here. So now we're telling the REST framework. So remember, we added in the REST framework, we pip installed it, and we just told it that we want to use simple JWT for authentication. So we have to notify it and tell it exactly how we're going to handle things. So we have that set up, and let's go ahead and configure some URLs to actually generate a token. So if we continue going through our documentation here, we can go ahead and go to this section and set up some URL patterns here. So this is all going to be in our API. So the first thing I want to do is use these built-in views. So kind of like what we did with our password reset views, we have built-in class-based views here. So I'm going to take all of this right here. Let's go into our API folder in URLs, and I'm going to paste this just underneath our views import. So we shouldn't have any indentation errors here, but just in case, let's go ahead and clean that up. We'll bring those in, and now we have access to two different views. So the first view here, token obtain pair, is to generate a token based on a user. So what's going to happen is when we hit this endpoint and we submit our username and password, it's going to generate a JSON web token for us. Now the second view here is going to generate something called a refresh token, and I'll get into this in a second here. So let's go ahead and go to these two URLs here. We'll copy all of that, and we're just going to paste this inside of our URL patterns here. So inside of the API. So I'm just going to paste this above here, and now we have these two URLs here. So I just want to scroll slowly just in case you want to manually type those out if you don't have the documentation. So I'll just close this out really quick, minimize that, and let's take a look at what we have here. So a token is going to generate a simple token, and a refresh token is going to give us a token to generate a new token. So this is how it works. A token is going to be stored in the browser somewhere, and it typically has a short lifespan of usually like 5 minutes or so, and that's it. So just to make sure that this token doesn't get stolen, somebody doesn't hack our website, that token expires. And what we want to do is securely store something called a refresh token. Now this refresh token will have a longer lifespan, and this can be 30 days, it can be a year, or however long we want it. And basically anytime this token expires, we send a refresh token to generate a new token and update what we have in the browser. So to see that in play, it would be a little bit easier to understand it. So let's go ahead and just continue here. So we have these two endpoints, and now this is in our API. So we have our routes here, we have projects, and specifically a project. So let's go ahead and test this. So I'm going to test it first from the Django admin panel. So let's go ahead and go into, actually I want to customize these. So we're going into API. So that's already what the root domain tells us here. So we don't need to have that. So we can just go into users, and then I'll update this. So API /users/token. So we'll open up our browser, and let's go into users, and we'll just do token. So this is what the Django REST framework interface gives me, and it actually gives me a form to work with. So my information is already filled out by default. So this is the user that I'm working with. So all I have to do here is submit a post request. So by default, it already knows that I'm submitting a post request with this form. So if I submit this, look what I get back here. So I get back a refresh token and an access token. So if I take this token right here, go all the way to the right before that closing quote right there. Let's just copy this and let's paste this in here. So we're going to paste it and look what happens here. So we get the header, which tells us the type of token, the algorithm used to encrypt it. And then if we go to the payload, it tells us it's an access token. This is the expiration date, which is Friday, July 9th. And it gives us the user ID. So we can actually modify this token quite a bit. We won't get into that here, but that's what's going on here. So we can actually throw in a token, decrypt it, and now we have information about our user. So let's go ahead and actually do this from Postman. So I want to go ahead and add in a new request here. So we'll just do request. In this case, this is going to be a post request. So we're going to save that. We're going to see this get updated. I want to rename the request here. So we're just going to say users/token. So that's going to be the route here. And let's go ahead and make sure we're in our environment. We want to set the URL here. So we'll just do URL, and then we're going to API/users/token. So I just want to send this request, and let's add in a closing / there because that could give us an issue. And we need to send in some parameters here. So we need to send in some data in the body here. So in the body, let's go ahead and send in form data so we can actually do it as raw data too. So let me just bring this down here. And I'm going to specify the type as JSON data. So this is actually what a request from the front end will look like. So we selected body, selected JSON data, that's the format. And let's go ahead and create this request. So I'm going to say user name. Actually, I just realized I'm not going to send this request because I'm going to have to show the password, but in theory, you would just do the username. So that would be Dennis Ivy. And then you can do password. And I'll actually test it. I'm just going to blur out my password, but even though it's a dummy password, I still don't like to show it. So let's go ahead and type that out. Let's send the request. And we should get back a token. So I think that URL variable is actually not correct. It has to be capitalized. So I'm going to send that request again. And here we go. So we get back that response of refresh and access. So that's our request. That's all working here. So let's go ahead and I want to show you a few more things here. So if we go back to our website, I actually want to create a protected route now. So in Postman, I'm just going to go ahead and close out this request because we do have the password. So I'm going to save the changes there. Let's close these out. And let's restrict these passwords or the projects here. So right now, I'm going to put on a restriction and say only an authenticated user can view this. Now, we're not going to leave it this way, but I just want to put it there to show you what this is going to look like. So at the top here, I want to make a few more imports here. So inside of API view, I want to add in a direct decorator here that is permission classes. So this is a new decorator that we're going to use. And if you're using class-based views, there's going to be a mixin that you can use for this that sets the permission classes. So this is basically who's allowed, what kind of extra permissions do we put on each view. Now, after that, I do need to import the actual classes here. So I can do from, or the actual values. So I'm going to do from rest_framework.permissions. So we'll do permissions, and we are going to import is authenticated. So these are different types of permissions. So we're going to use is authenticated. Now, if we want to only allow a user that's an admin, we can actually use is admin. So we're not going to use this, but I just wanted to show you that. So I'm going to go ahead and save that. We're going to bring this down to our projects here, and just underneath our get request, let's go ahead and add in that decorator. So we're going to do permission classes. Let's go ahead and put in the parentheses there. And then we're just going to add in that permission that we added. So is authenticated. So it's not in a string. So now anytime a user wants to get projects here, they need to be authenticated. So this is where this token is coming into play. So we just set up a restricted route. It's the same thing as adding in something like this here. So earlier on, we had these decorators where we add in login required, pretty much the same thing, but now for the Django REST framework. So I'm going to do this from the URL directly. So let's go ahead and go into projects. And let's go ahead and test this out. So when I go to this request, I can't do anything here. So it's telling me that we need to be authenticated to actually access this. Now, this is where Postman really comes into play here. So we can actually send a token with this route. So we can't do it from here, but we can do it from Postman. So in Postman, let's send that request. We're going to get back this response that tells us we are not authorized to view this. and we want to send that token. So let's go ahead and generate a token. So we're going to go back to users token. Let's go ahead and generate one. And this token only has a lifespan of 5 minutes. So if it doesn't work right away, just go ahead and generate a new one. So we're going to copy this token and we're going into projects here. And let's go into headers. So in this case, we're going to set the type of header that we're sending. This is going to be authorization, and the token is going to be bearer. So bearer like that. And I always spelled this one wrong. It's like bearer or whatever. I don't know how to say that. So now we're just going to paste in that token. So we leave a space here and we add the token. So if I click out of that, we just want this space. So we say authorization and then send that token. So now on each request, I'm going to hit send. This token will be sent in the headers. So make sure you add that in the headers, and let's go ahead and hit send. So now I have access to all those users or all those projects here because I sent that token. It's a protected route. We wouldn't have access to it, but now that I send the token, it works. Now, if I uncheck that, we're not going to send the token. We get back this response. That route is blocked, but when I send that, then we get back this information. So let's go ahead and see what that looks like in the views here. So I can actually get the user. So we're just going to do print, and then we're going to say user, and this is going to be request.user. So in this case, what's happening here is we've used this before. We've used request user to get the user, but before we had a standard view, so it would actually go into sessions and pull up the user that we have stored in the sessions. But because we're using a token and we have this decorator, this is an API view, even if we're logged in like to the admin panel or the standard way, it's not going to find it. It's going to require the user that we pass in into that token. So let's go ahead and send this request. We'll send it, and let's look at what we print out here. So I'll open this up here, and let's see, somewhere here we should have printed out a user. So let's try that one more time. I'm going to minimize this, and we'll send this request here. So I'll try to shrink it, and I need to find that send button. So somewhere right here, let's hit send. And then let's make sure it's working actually. So maybe I messed something up here. Let's see. Let's bring up the body. So it should be working, and maybe I printed that out from the wrong area. So let's see, get projects, print user, request.user. Maybe I'm not saving it. Let's try that one more time. Sorry about this little delay here. So that's in get projects, and we're sending that to the right area. So it should be printing this out. There we go. So user is Dennis Ivy. So what's happening here is we added this permission, it's blocking it, but because that token is being sent, the view is actually decoding the token and finding the correlated user in the database. So at this point, I wanted to go ahead and take this off here. We're going to use this later in the, I believe it's going to be in the next video. We're just going to remove that. So this route is no longer going to be protected. I want to make sure that we can access the projects here. So let's go ahead and go back to API/projects. So we'll go to projects, and everything's working. So we're going to protect another route, so we'll get back to that in a second. But one more thing that I wanted to show you is how to customize a token. So if we keep scrolling down here, actually in the documentation, we should see customizing token claims. So in this case, we should see some documentation on how to do this somewhere in settings. Here we go. So I went into settings right here, and we get this dictionary right here. So this is all this information about our tokens. So this is going to be in settings.py. So I copied that. Let's bring that up here, and let's put that just underneath this REST framework dictionary here. So I'm going to paste that in, and here we go. So let's go ahead and also add in the date timestamp right here. So let's copy that, bring that in, and I'm going to put that all the way up at the top here. So just by path or just above it. So if we look at this, we can modify our token. So at this point, anything that I don't override will be left alone. So I'm going to remove that. We can also specify how we call that token. So we can change this to whatever we want. Right now it's bear. So that's why in Postman, we had to add bear into the headers here. So we added it like that. So we can modify that. We also have access to change the lifespan of a token. So here, access lifetime token here, it expires after 5 minutes. Refresh token expires after 30 days or 1 day. So I can change that to 30, and I can say, days here and tell that token to expire after 1 day. So this is what we can use to customize a token. If we want to change the algorithm to do this, we can, but this is everything that we need to modify it. So that's it for this video. We created our token. We went over JSON Web Tokens. I showed you how to restrict some routes and also how to add in these tokens, send them, and then how to customize them. In the next video, we are going to start sending post requests. So I want to allow a user to vote, and we're going to do this vote here from Postman. So we're actually going to send a post request, and this is going to be also a restricted route. So we're going to take care of that in the next video.